Today we're going to learn about the nervous system and how it's broken down into central and peripheral nervous systems, and we'll take a look at what happens in each of those two regions and how each of them are controlled. So as I said before, the nervous system is broken down into two component parts. First is the central nervous system, or CNS, and secondly is the peripheral nervous system, which is the PNS. First, we'll talk about the breakdown of the central nervous system. The central nervous system is broken down into the brain and the spinal cord, and that's about it. And now we'll talk about the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is all of the nerves that branch off of the brain and spinal cord and go to the different regions of our body. And it's divided into somatic nerves and autonomic nerves, or the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nerves are divided into sensory nerves, and sensory nerves collect information from the outside world through sensory receptors and send that information to the central nervous system to be processed. Motor nerves collect information from the central nervous system, that processed information, and then take it to a muscle or muscle fiber to perform a response. The somatic nervous system is said to be under voluntary control. So we can actually decide to perform an action with our somatic nerves. So our autonomic nerves are divided into sympathetic nerves and parasympathetic nerves. And our sympathetic nervous system is responsible for times of danger or stress. So it's sometimes referred to as the flight or fight response. Our parasympathetic nerves or nervous system deal with, just the balance of normal day-to-day functions. So sometimes this system is called the rest and digest response. And these two systems are under involuntary control. So involuntary meaning we don't get to decide when we digest a meal. We don't get to decide when we get startled by a dangerous bear chasing us. Those things are automatic. So autonomic nervous system can also be referred to or thought of as the automatic or reflex response that we have. The central nervous system, as I said before, is divided into the brain and spinal cord. And our brain has about 100 billion neurons. And on top of the neurons, it has even more glial cells. And glial cells are special nerve cells that are there for support. And we'll talk more about some special glial cells when we talk about the structure of the neuron. But the Schwann cells are an example of a glial cell. The spinal cord runs down the middle of our back, and we need to be able to protect both our brain and our spinal cord. So our brain is surrounded by the skull, and when we're born, our skull is in many, many pieces to allow our head to be able to fit through the birth canal. So those pieces of skull actually can fold in on themselves so that the head can fit through the pelvis. So the skull protects our head, and then our spinal cord is protected by our vertebrae. So they make up collectively the vertebral column or the spinal column. And in between each of those vertebrae is a cartilaginous disc that allows for bending and flexing so that we aren't, just rigid. We're able to bend over. Our brain is about 1.5 kilograms in mass, and its surface is highly folded, as you can see here in this lovely drawing of the brain that I made. The brain is divided into two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and those two hemispheres are divided by a bundle of nerves that connect them, and that bundle of nerves is called their corpus callosum. So information can be sent from the left side to the right side and vice versa. Now, the interesting thing about our hemispheres is that the right hemisphere controls the left side of our body and the left hemisphere controls the right side of our body, which is pretty interesting. So if you have a stroke, for instance, or a brain injury, and you can't move the right side of your body, or something on the right side of your body is affected, you know that the injury the stroke or whatever brain injury has happened in the left side of your brain, which is pretty interesting. If you're interested in finding out more about what our two hemispheres do, I suggest watching a TED Talk called What Can You Do with Half a Brain? And it's a really fascinating video about a neurosurgeon who has had to remove an entire hemisphere in some of his patients because they have such severe epilepsy that they cannot function normally. And amazingly, they are able to adapt. Their brains are so plastic and so able to return back and regain some of the functions that the other side of the brain should have done. So that's pretty fascinating that children can recover from this drastic brain surgery. And then another video, one more about the corpus callosum and how the two sides of our brain are able to talk through the corpus callosum, is a video called You Are Two, and it follows what happens when you sever that corpus callosum. Now the brain's hemispheres aren't able to talk to one another. It's kind of a mind-boggling phenomenon. Again, this type of surgery used to be done with people who had severe epilepsy as a treatment option. But the problem is some functions are lost when you do this because the two sides of the brain can't talk to one another. So now we're going to talk about the peripheral nervous system. So its function is to collect and send information between the central nervous system and the rest of our body, known as the periphery. And then, as I said before, it's divided into the somatic and autonomic nervous system. But before we move on to talk about those, I think we need to take a pause to look at the structure of the neuron and what the neuron's parts do. So this is my basic rendition of a neuron, and now we're going to talk about what each part does. So right here and all these branches here are called the dendrites. And what the dendrites do is they collect information either from a sensory receptor or from another neuron and then send it towards the cell body, which then will send the information all the way along to the end of the neuron. The soma is this part right here, also known as the cell body, and it contains the nucleus and all the major organelles. This long skinny projection from the cell body or soma is called the axon. So that would be that skinny black line that's going all the way along. Most neurons are wrapped in special cells called Schwann cells, which are glial cells. And those Schwann cells work to insulate the neuron and allow it to be protected. Its role basically is to speed up nerve transmission from the one end of the neuron to the other. It basically acts very much like the insulation on an electrical wire. It insulates and speeds up that transmission. In between, there are tiny little gaps, are these things called the nodes of Ranvier, and they also help with nerve transmission. What happens is the signals can jump from node to node along the axon rather than having to travel slowly this way. So it actually speeds up transmission. If you have certain types of autoimmune diseases, such as multiple sclerosis, your immune system starts attacking the myelin, the wrapping insulation around your neurons. So then you're not able to send information. It would be just like getting a short in an electrical wire. If that insulation broke, the electrical impulse can't go, and then the nerve signal also can't be sent down. Down here at the end of the neurons are these little branches again, and these are the axon terminals. And at this point, the information will be sent from the axon terminal off to the next neuron or to the muscle cell, depending on what it's connecting to. So all the information on nerve transmission and what happens at the synapse, which is that gap between one neuron to the next, is found in our other video on nerves and synapses. So our somatic system involves sending information to and from our periphery. It's under voluntary control, and it sends information to and from our skeletal muscles. So our skeletal muscles are special types of muscles that, like I said before, are under voluntary control. So we can decide when we want to move our arm, our head, our leg, our foot, our finger, We can, scratch our nose when we want to. We can move our arms in a particular way. We can pick up a pencil and write. All of those things are under voluntary control. Now, there are times when we will have a reflex motion. So if something comes flying at our face, we're not going to think about, oh, I need to move my head out of the way. That's considered a reflex motion. Our body will just adjust and will reflexively move without having to stop and think about it. So right now we're going to talk about what is known as the reflex arc. So that's one of those motions that we don't stop and think about. So in this picture, we see somebody holding their hand over a candle, which would be quite hot. So in our hands, we would have a temperature receptor or a pain receptor. So that receptor would collect information from the hot candle and send it all the way up the sensory neuron to our spinal cord. And then in the spinal cord, rather than sending the information up to our brain, which would what would be normally our response, it actually sends it directly back through something called an interneuron. In this diagram, it's called a relay neuron. So an interneuron or relay neuron, and then directly back to a motor neuron, and then it takes it to a muscle and tells the muscle, get the hand away from the candle, it's really hot. So that is an example of a reflex arc or a reflex motion. So our autonomic nervous system, if you remember, is under involuntary control. And before we move on, I feel like we need to talk about the different types of muscle so that you can understand the difference between voluntary and involuntary muscle control. So we have 3 different types of muscle in our body. The first one was the one that was under the somatic control or the voluntary control. So that's our skeletal muscle. So those are the muscles that line our legs, our arms, our hands, all the things that we can move by free will. And these muscles are special and identifiable because of the stripe pattern that they have. So they're sometimes called striated muscle fibers because of those striations or striping patterns. They are unique because what happens is when they were developing, individual muscle cells fused together to become these long muscle fibers. So here's a fiber and here's another fiber and so on. But they each retain their nucleus. So you can see these little dark spots are each a nucleus. And one thing that we say is a factor with the nucleus is when one cell has one nucleus, and in this case, because of the fact that these muscle fibers have multiple nuclei, we can infer that they actually were single cells that fused together. The other 2 types of muscle are under involuntary control, and they're controlled by the autonomic nervous system. So the first type is the smooth muscle, and the reason why it's called smooth muscle is it doesn't have that striations that you see on the skeletal muscle, so it's smooth in appearance. And you can see these muscles, fibers, each have, again, nuclei and so on. And these muscle fibers are what make up our internal organs, so the muscles of our stomach to cause the food to mix, the muscles that make up our esophagus to move food down our tube, the muscles that are in our small and large intestine to move the products of digestion throughout. So all of those are made of smooth muscle and under involuntary control. The other type of involuntary muscle is cardiac muscle, and one thing that's similar between it and skeletal muscle is that it does have some striations. You can't see it very well in this diagram, but you can see it in the sketch or the rendition of it. So you can see there are these striations. The thing that's different from cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle is that cardiac muscle branches and skeletal muscle doesn't. So if you were to look under a microscope at different textures or different cross-sections of muscle, you would see the differences between. Cardiac muscle, by the way, is found in our heart, and it has the ability to contract repetitively without tiring, whereas our skeletal muscles can get overtired through lactic acid buildup, and that would be problematic if our heart gave out. So our skeletal muscles can give out, but our heart muscle thankfully does not very often. So now we'll talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. which are components of the autonomic nervous system, and they actually have very opposite or antagonistic effects. So one of them will speed things up while the other one speeds things down. So we'll talk about those things now. So the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for our fight or flight response. And this response expends a lot of energy, but it's really important because its function is to get you away from danger or perceived danger or stress. So because its job is to get you away from danger, it will speed up things that will help you escape danger and slow down body processes that would hinder your escape from danger. So we'll go over those in just a minute. So it's called fight or flight because you basically have two options when you're being chased by a bear or something else that's very frightening. You can either stay and fight, or you can run away from the problem, which would be my preference if I was being chased by a bear. So now we're going to talk about the responses that are going to take place if we suddenly have a bear jump into our path. So there is a hormone that will be released to cause all of these changes, and that hormone is produced on these special little organs right on top of your kidneys, and those are called the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands produce a hormone called epinephrine, or sometimes we call it adrenaline, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to some of the other details. So first of all, one thing that's going to happen is your pupils are going to dilate when you're startled or being chased by a bear. And the reason why your pupils will dilate is if you were in low light, it's hard to see. So the bigger your pupil is, the more light you can let in, and the more able you'll be to see in the dark. So it's really a good idea to have a dilated pupil when you're startled, in case it happens to happen when you're in the dark. Another thing that's going to happen is we will start to inhibit saliva flow, because it's really not that important to have a moist mouth when you're trying to get away from a bear. So that's why sometimes when you're feeling really startled or stressed out, your mouth goes dry, because you are inhibiting the flow of saliva. Another thing that happens is your heart rate accelerates. And the reason why your heart rate accelerates is you need to get more oxygen to your cells and to also transport glucose to your cells so that you can perform cellular respiration, which will give you the energy to either fight the bear or get away from the bear. Another thing that happens is in your lungs, your bronchi and your bronchioles will dilate, so they'll get a wider diameter, so you can take deeper breaths and bring more oxygen into your lungs so that you can exchange the carbon dioxide and oxygen and deliver the oxygen to your cells for cellular respiration. So one little point right here is if you are having an allergic reaction and you use an EpiPen, you're actually injecting adrenaline or epinephrine into your bloodstream so that you can initiate this entire response. And that's what allows your airways to stay open and get you to the hospital if you're having an anaphylactic reaction. So that's just a little aside. Another thing that gets inhibited is basically the whole digestive process. So peristalsis will be inhibited, and all the other enzymes won't be secreted into your stomach and so on, because you need to get rid of the danger as fast as possible. You're not going to take time to digest the last meal because it's not going to be useful to you. It's going to take too long to digest the meal to get the energy to your cells. So that will be inhibited. Another thing that will happen, though, is in your liver. So remember, your liver is found here. You will start converting glycogen, the storage polysaccharide, into glucose so that you can send the glucose to all the body cells so that, again, you can perform cellular respiration and get out of danger. And then finally, the last thing that is inhibited is your bladder contractions. You really don't need to know that you need to go to the bathroom at the time that a bear is chasing you. So you won't feel that urge to go to the bathroom. Although sometimes when you're really, really frightened, your voluntary control of your bladder stops and you actually do have, you will wet yourself. But again, it's better to be embarrassed and have wet pants than to be eaten by the bear. So that's your sympathetic flight or fight response. So our parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for what is called our rest and digest response. And in this response, we're actually conserving energy. So we're going to slow down any of those energy wasting processes. And we will speed up other processes in the body that are processes that don't expend a ton of energy and keep us alive under normal circumstances. So under our rest and digest response, our pupils just respond just to regular changes in light. So they'll dilate when we're in the dark, and they'll constrict when we're in bright light to allow the proper amount of light flow into our eye. Our saliva will be stimulated so that we are ready to start digesting starch whenever we take food into our mouth. Our heartbeat would slow down to normal rates. Our bronchi will constrict back to normal diameter. Our digestive system will be fully functional, so we will allow for peristalsis to move food down to our stomach, which then will move food into our small intestine and then our large intestine and to our rectum and so on. Our liver, instead of stimulating the conversion of glycogen to glucose, will stimulate the release of bile, which is one of the molecules of digestion that helps us start breaking down fats. And then finally, our bladder contractions will be functional. So, if we do have to go to the bathroom, we will feel the urge or the need to go to the bathroom. So those are all the rest and digest response.